Barry Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College, and welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues of a nonprofit interest through a nonprofit lens that affect our communal well-being. We're a proud partner of ACC TV, but given COVID-19, we're going virtual for our fourth season. Our center is fully committed to being an anti-racist organization, to accelerating our personal learning journeys, confronting our biases and blind spots, and creating opportunities for others to do the same. This episode is part of our series on the Hispanic Latinx experience in Austin, which is part of a larger series on peoples of color experience in Austin. You can view our first portion of that series, The Black Experience in Austin, on our website, www.nonprofitaustin.org/civil-society, as well as the current program and future programs. My guest today is Deanna Maldonado, President and CEO of the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which represents Latino small businesses in Central Texas. With the collaboration of corporate partners and community stakeholders, she assumed that role just a few months ago, right in the midst of all of our COVID excitement in July 2020. Per the Austin American-Statesman, and I quote, "When Deanna Maldonado was named CEO of the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, chamber officials cited her policy experience, longstanding relationships with the community, and the ability to help lead the region's Latino businesses to a new stage of growth. Her resume includes working as a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley, one term as the first Latina to represent parts of Williamson County in the Texas legislature, and more than 20 years in the Texas Controller's Office. While in the legislature, she served as secretary for the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, Defense and Veteran Affairs, and coveted state affairs committees. She's also served 6 years on the Round Rock Independent School District Board of Trustees, including as president. It doesn't seem like she's done very much, does it? Currently, she serves on education and leadership boards as president for Seedling Mentors, on the advisory council for the Bill Munday School of Business at St. Edward's University, and she has her Bachelor of Business Administration, magna cum laude, from St. Edward's University. Above all else, in her narrative, she stresses that she believes in the importance of family. Her father, a deceased Korean War veteran, always taught her to put her best foot forward and to earn a good education, while she says her mother was a great role model with a strong work ethic and determination. Deanna has instilled these values in her own children and now can develop them in her new granddaughter, Camilla. So Deanna, welcome. It's great to have you on this morning, today. You've led an interesting life of a public service. So thank you again for being here and being willing to talk with us. Let's start talking about your current work. So in the Statesman article interview I referenced a few minutes ago, you said that your chamber's mission is more crucial than ever today as many Hispanic-owned businesses are struggling. So can you talk about what that struggle is and what the chamber is doing to address this challenge?
Well, Barry, thank you to you and to ACC for having me on this forum and this discussion. Delighted to be here. As far as, the crucial time for Latino businesses to really excel and rise up to that next level is because time and time again over decades and years, there's a strong work ethic that comes from Latino businesses, Latino households, and the labor participation rate where Latinos are clearly instrumental in the economic growth engine of our communities, near and far, state and on the national level. So as a culmination that we had with this year with the pandemic, the economic disruption, the social and systemic injustice that has come about as a result of all this unrest, it really brings a lens to really redefine and reformat and really put a light on that strong work ethic perseverance and determination that Latino businesses are poised to be.
Well, in speaking with your colleague, Tam Hawkins at the Greater Austin Black Chamber, she talked about how, and this was several months ago, but that Black businesses didn't have the same access to capital as Anglo businesses. Is that a similar problem being faced by Hispanic businesses?
I believe it is. With regards to minority businesses, there's always a gap or a series of steps to connect to access to capital. And very recently during the pandemic as well, I read a fascinating book with The Color of Law, which I kind of have here. And I reference it because part of me being at the helm of leading the chamber and identifying the needs for our small businesses and bringing that support of our corporations and businesses to highlight the strengths of our economic activity. But you have to go back of how we got there, why this lack of access to capital is happening. And it is because of policies and that limited or did not allow for Black and brown families and homeowners and businesses to be able to access. So it is the undoing that we have to look at those policies and ordinances that were done decades ago that created this repercussion of wealth and generational gap and opportunities for minority businesses and minority households to have that generational wealth. So having understood that, this is why in my relationships with policymakers that I'm able to cultivate and bring some background and work collectively to look at the undoing of those injustices, if I may say, while at the same time, Barry, I've just been reading a fascinating report by the Latino Donor Collective, where it says that the economic consumption and the growth of Latinos right now, if you were to put all the economic contribution of Latinos in the US today, it would be the 8th largest GDP in the world.
Wow.
So we have some really, really strong discussions, some really strong numbers and evidence for us to have those meaningful discussions to change this dynamic.
So why do you think that that's not common knowledge?
It's not common knowledge because you have voices and organizations that, again, for decades, that has been the driving force on what gets changed and who is at the table, Barry. And like corporations are looking at, and even investment companies, all of these different sectors, people are saying you have to have diverse boards, you have to have diverse voices, because when you have different lived experiences as well as a different lens, you're able to make better decisions and have an inclusivity of how our communities look, what's the trajectory of our state going, and to make sure that we're not missing those opportunities, and we address them by having the right people at the table, having those voices at the table in the initial and formation of new policies and ordinances and legislation that will impact not just one sector, but all sectors of our communities.
So that moves us to some extent to the issue of politics, okay? And in the just completed elections, there's a lot of attention being paid to Hispanic voting power and how influential it would be. How is that growing awareness, if at all, affecting Hispanic business, and to go beyond that, Hispanic identity, particularly here in Austin?
Yes, a great question. Again, another fascinating dynamic that has been happening slowly to where now it's gaining attention in mainstream media, and that is being picked up. So in Latinos, I mean, we are 60 million nationally. In Texas, we're about 11.1, 11.5 million. So we represent around 38% of our state's population. And studies show that in 2021, we will be the majority minority in Texas. And with regards to Florida, California, Arizona, Nevada, I mean, all of these states are growing in their numbers as far as Latino population and the voting population, because Latinos are a young demographic. So I also read a report that every 30 seconds, a Latino becomes eligible to vote. So the numbers are staggering in growth and opportunity. And one of the things that hasn't happened is that most pollsters and people, when they go out to, secure votes and reach out to communities, they don't reach out in a way that's meaningful to Latino communities. And they look at the propensity rate of 70% of voting. Well, if you have not been reaching out to Latinos, then you really are missing on that voice. You really are missing on that education component, and facilitating those ways where Latinos can become involved, can become engaged, because they do want to and are engaged. They're just haven't been approached in the right ways for them to have that voting presence. Now it is growing, I will say. I mean, in 2016, we had 27.8 million Latinos that voted nationally. We have almost 7,000 Latino elected officials across the nation. We have 42 members in Congress. So there is representation, and it's growing. And I think once we have that level of representation, then I think the voting power will continue to grow in a meaningful way.
So that begs a question. So what is the best way to reach out and engage what is a very, very diverse community?
I think it's first understanding that Latinos is just not a monolithic, that are a diverse segment and demographic. I mean, there's so many different ethnicities with regards to when you say Latinos or Hispanic. I mean, my understanding, there's like 26 different ethnicities, whether it's Guatemalteco, Nicaragüense, Peruano, Ecuadorian. So there are just many different ethnicities that resonate to different issues based on their origin of country or what's important culturally. I mean, we are a hardworking, population, a hardworking demographic. So there's a lot of economic contribution. We're also essential frontline workers. And but in reaching out, it's a circle of trust. You just don't go in and out and just give issues or policy messages that don't resonate with the community. And most importantly, you don't go in the end. You want to have those conversations years out, months out. And that's one of the things that Latinos have picked up from pollsters and candidates and politicians, that they know that they need the Latino vote, but they invest the time and the energy, very late in the cycle.
So they're really not part of the community. They're basically exploitive.
Right. Yeah. And Latinos have picked up on that, and that's saying and giving that message back. But people represent and have their needs represented differently. So you have Republicans, conservatives, progressives, Democrats, independents. I mean, and that's why there's a lot of head scratching, because pollsters and think that Latinos would have voted very strongly Democratic in South Texas. Well, they didn't. And so it depends who is really paying attention and will listen and potentially deliver those needs.
So as a tangential question, why did such a large proportion of Latinos vote conservative in South Texas?
Generally, Latinos are conservative. I mean, in my family, we have, some conservative, conservative upbringing where, we're Catholic, and, you follow, your religious practices. So there is that thread and that formation of being culturally conservative. Um, and so I would say that that's why it would lean on Latinos in South Texas being that they voted Republican as well, but then also that it's also a message of the economy. It is also the message of jobs, and that's a lifeline if they want to make sure that we have those opportunities, that they're not diminished by policies that would potentially, do away with threaten their livelihood. So, healthcare, their livelihood as far as jobs and the economy, and education opportunities, and then just that cultural aspect around it. I can see clearly why they would vote
Yeah,
in the way that they did.
yeah. It was a surprise to many pundits, it appeared, and for people who don't really understand because they haven't invested in their community clearly. So coming back to your day in and day out job at the chamber,
Okay.
what does the picture of Hispanic business look like in Austin? And just, you mentioned some national statistics.
Yeah.
What's the impact locally?
The impact locally, like I said, in Texas, we have over 11 million Latinos in Texas. In Austin proper, I think we also have around 35% of Hispanics or Latinos in Austin, Central Texas. I also read a report where there's around 51,000 Hispanic small businesses in Central Texas. And again, Barry, these numbers and this information is not in mainstream media. So that is part of my mission, to share those successes, because they just didn't generate overnight. They have been in our community. They are the fabric of our community. And I want to make sure that we identify and have those conversations with those businesses so that they can have the longevity, and that they can, through their businesses, that they can have a legacy of passing it on to their different generations, and then keep those businesses thriving. So what I'm doing is also talking to the mayor, talking to policymakers, legislators, business leaders, to say, let's have a talk of how we are thriving and have been thriving, and with regards to access to capital, how we can continue to raise that economic contribution and the consumer market that the Latino population really, contributes and expands through our markets.
So on one level, the current COVID situation, horror, tragedy, whatever, trauma, has appears to have increased the public's awareness of the disparities for peoples of color, communities of color, and seems to have increased a sense of not sympathy in terms of feeling sorry, but sense of empathy. Do you think that's going to be long lasting when hopefully COVID has dissipated? Do you think it's going to affect the change in the relationships between people in Austin in particular? Or do you think we're
Okay.
going back to 1920, right after the Spanish flu?
I know, and that's what I keep reference as well too, of how that impacted globally, and that's one of our the most recent reference that we could go to. It's hard to tell right now. There's a lot of moving parts, but unfortunately for Latinos, we are more disproportionately impacted by COVID. Because we are multi-generational families, and we're young families, but then again we have extended families that we cohabitate with, and that we visit, and again, because of those strong cultural ties, the education and the information and the resources to the communities hasn't come as fast, and for them to know of the safety and the social distances, and all those practices that should have been taken in advance of. So yes, you are seeing a lot more deaths in Austin. You have a lot more Latino deaths as a result of that gap and that connection of resources and information to Latino families and households. So because we're going to come out of it having experienced a death or a loved one that really, had a negative impact from COVID, it is my wish and hope that we'll be exercising more safety precautions coming out of it because of those negative experiences from COVID.
Yeah. Well, let's stay on the question of family, because family is so important. Um, so you were the first Latina elected to represent Williamson County in the House of Representatives, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. So what is it about your upbringing, the value system, that led you to assume a public role rather than staying, as a government employee or private entrepreneur, and not bothering to cause all this trouble as a as a leader?
I know. I missed the memo somewhere along the way.
And I say that half jokingly, because
Yes, no, absolutely.
John Lewis said, "Good trouble is great." So
Yeah. Getting good, stay in good trouble. Uh, what I look back and reflect, I grew up in Eagle Pass, a small barrio. We were very poor, and it's when you're young and happy. And then when you think back and like, yeah, we were pretty poor. And so, but I think that my mom she was just the rock of the family. And she had a lot of perseverance, and she was basically kept the ship going tight. Everybody had their role to play. My father also, he was more the activist out in the community. And I didn't know till later towards the, maybe the latter part of his life, that he was a community activist for the meat packers. And that's why we ended up in Guyman, Oklahoma, when we were very little. But he always said, put your best foot forward, smile. And if people, don't respond back, just walk around them and keep going and give back to the community. And I remember as a little girl, he would always tell us that, because he always wanted to make sure that we were doing our best. But I think I took it a little bit to heart and went into public service. And it's like, I think this is what dad means. But I think that was part of my DNA makeup. And I truly found joy in helping people and solving problems for people. So as the time went on, and literally this was part of my upbringing in school, then as time went on, and then professionally, that I guess having had those years of formation and exposed to things that I normally wouldn't have, allowed me to take it to that next level and be in public service. And more importantly too, because I didn't have role models, and I just knew that it was important to have that representation when decisions are being made at the table. And if it wasn't going to be, me, it was going to be somebody else. So it was a leap with faith, but at the same time, calculated risk of having a good support and a good kitchen cabinet of advisors to help me along the way.
What was it like being Latino and in the House of Representatives, which is not known for its liberalness?
Correct. Yeah, that was the hardest campaign.
Even more so. Well, I guess we're reversing, so probably as bad as it is today. But
Yeah, right. So, and during that time, Barry, I was campaigning in 2007. I got elected in 2008. Let's just say then when Obama won, his election got announced before mine. I mean, we went like around 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night before I found out that I had won. The political pundits pretty much said, can Maldonado really switch this seat to go Democratic? Because I was the polar opposite of what the established had been as Anglo conservative Republican. And here I'm like female, Latina, Democrat. But what gained and me the opportunity of support, the crossover support, was that having been a school board trustee, having been school board president, having passed, $349 million bond, being a single parent, it touched a lot of people in different ways of my background and what I was doing. So I was able to get that crossover vote, and that they know that I was going to continue to have the best interests for the district in mind, that I wasn't, going to be, a radical politician. And that has been my style, is be centric and look at the issues that really keep our communities thriving, keep them safe, and look at those unity issues versus the polarizing issues. And so we did make history. I was the first woman to be elected to House District 52, and I was the first person of color to be elected to House District 52.
So in today's world, with all that's going on, okay, what are the challenges that a young Latino woman, well, by definition will be a woman, but young Latina would be facing that perhaps somebody who isn't in that position wouldn't perceive, wouldn't understand?
With regards to being in politics or
Yeah, with regard to trying to achieve a role in politics or in business.
in business, okay. I would say, having listened to a Zoom meeting just recently with regards to women, Latinas, as candidates and running for office, in general, women, are given less funding than a male counterpart. So that's a challenge for women, and then even more so for Latinas when we're raising money, because first, we're not comfortable to ask for money. And we have to figure out how to get, beyond that obstacle and impasse, so that we feel comfortable. It's just a number, and it's a yes or a no. And it's like there's a lot of emotion into it, because money does bring emotion
Yep.
into it. So that's a conundrum. And my cousin, who's also a former state legislator from Kansas, we were elected at the same time. I was in Texas, she in Kansas, and she's also the former Secretary of Labor for Kansas. And we were talking about, maybe we need to do like a roadshow and talk to women candidates on that specific issue, because that's the one thing that trips a lot of women and a lot of Latinas in raising money. With regards to businesses, is having, again, identifying what that access to capital is, and making sure that there is a good business plan, making sure that we have mentors to guide us in our business acumen, as we're building that business acumen and the process of what to look out for, avoid those pitfalls, so that you can remove those obstacles and get to the capital, get to building your business, and having the sustainability of it, not just to be a one night, 1 year, and you close the shingles. I mean, our intent in the chamber, and through my experiences, Barry, is to have those upfront conversations and have the individuals take time to study and digest and know what that means, so that they can really build and move forward.
Who have been your mentors, and what have they contributed to your path?
Um, Interestingly enough, I did not have mentors, as many mentors as one would think. Again, I grew up in a Eagle Pass small town, and just kind of had to make it on my own. No internet, but I had wonderful teachers. I had my third grade teacher that was just very impressionable upon me, and other teachers along the way. I mean, obviously, I just took in everything that my father would instill in us. And he would play classical music for us while we were, instead of Tejano music, whatever. So, and then he would always have us recite our multiplication tables, write them, and he would like quiz us. And again, my mom, she's like, okay, she taught us, or at least me, organizational skills and that structure. So I would give a lot of credit to my mom and my dad in that formation, and educators. But then growing up here, and then I did have the networks of Latina network groups that I joined. So I have some wonderful, wonderful friendships that I would call my kitchen cabinet or advisors, that when I was vulnerable and I was just so scared, um, they would just say, nope, just get back in there and fight. And this is why. So it helps to have and run that by somebody. And then what happened is that I would outgrow my advisors or mentors. So then I would have to go and look for other people.
Right.
I do have a wonderful peer friend in Chicago, Kevin Richardson. He's just an amazing mentor, excellent business in public affairs. And I've worked with him in state and on the national level. So different people, different for different needs. And so it's not that you just have one mentor, but you
Right.
have several, and be diligent and thoughtful when you reach out to them, so that it's not just a takeaway, but that you also give something in return back to them.
So, if you had been fortunate enough to have yourself as a mentor when you were a young girl back in Eagle Pass,
Yeah.
okay, what would you have told yourself? What do you wish you had known back then?
Okay. Um, I would say not to worry too much, but that there's a lot of flexibility. And I would worry about, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get this grade, or I'm not going to, go to college, or I don't know how to go to college. I don't know how to apply. I don't know which classes. I would just kind of worry, and just kind of like, just get all stressed out about it. And to some degree, because I didn't have the mentors, and because here's the thing, because I was afraid to speak up. So I'm making lost time. So I would say, just have your voice, bring out your voice. And I don't care if you're wrong, because you have a voice, but at least you're articulating, you're starting to kind of get comfortable with yourself and your thoughts, and how you're building that future for yourself. And if I would have spoken up sooner, instead of it having been in my mind and my head, I feel that, yeah, I could have maybe had a head start, or have gone, being able to solve these quicker. So that's what I say: speak up, have your voice, come into your voice, and just be wonderful with your voice.
So, one of our viewers has just asked, so how did you overcome that fear?
Because it bugged me so much. And I felt that it was hindering what I knew I could do, but it was a fear of not speaking up, and thinking that if I would say something, it was going to be wrong. And I don't remember. I just remember the moment, but I don't remember, when. But I remember the moment saying, enough is enough. Just start talking.
It's really powerful when you come to the realization everybody else is also afraid and they're wrong too. So, what the hell, right?
I know, and that's just it. Just knowing that I wasn't alone, and it was almost like laughing at myself. Ah, you silly girl. See?
Yeah, yeah. So, part of your job, both when you're in the political realm and to a great extent, you're still sort of in the political realm, small p,
Yes.
trying to affect policymakers and change how people look at other people. Um, how do you deal with what has to be the frustration of the glacial rate of change? When I'm sure you envision a world very different than the current world, and it's just taken a hell of a long time to get other people to share that vision and to get there. How do you deal with that frustration?
I do a lot of meditating. I do a lot of running.
All right.
I run a lot. I think it's
Is
having.
that how you got elected, by running?
Right, right. Yeah, I was running for office, and now I'm running marathons. So,
All right.
there you go. I think it's also having that realistic perspective, because if I'm frustrated now with, you know, moving and impacting certain changes that I know will be the betterment, obviously for Latino owners and Texas at large. I really have to reflect and step back. Like I said, reading The Color of Law, another wonderful book by Monica Munoz Martinez, The Injustice Never Leaves You. And just to know that it took decades of people who suffered so much more injustices, and it was years and decades. So when I think about that, it gives me a responsibility to move on and persevere but also track the progress, to say I'm going to do this in a month, or I'm going to have this done by a certain time period. So I break it down in chunks, and so that I can be accountable to the process of what I'm trying to impact and that I will impact, and then finding out when I'm going to bring a certain leaders into that conversation. I know, for example, I had a business leader that was wanting me to, push an agenda, an item, and but I don't want to be reactionary. I want to be more intentional, because I'm also thinking of that person in front of me that I also want it to be a win, or at least have that understanding of why I would want for them to support me. So for me I didn't feel that I wanted to be pushed, but at the same time being respectful, but knowing that in the end I did get that win for that individual. So you're just moving a lot of dynamics, but I know that ultimately that I have to be centered, I have to be focused in order for me to get that consensus.
You've answered this sort of as we talked along the way, but as my closing question, I just wanted to ask you, so you've done a number of things in your life. You've got a long way to go, so you're going to do a lot more interesting things. What lessons have you learned? What hard-earned wisdom do you have that you would share with other, particularly young women? But you could throw something in for the guys too, if you'd like.
Yes. I would say, be kind to yourself. I would say it's okay not to know. But I also say you owe it to yourself to be the best. And in this world that we have so much information around us and connections, that expand your horizons and go through stay curious is what I would say. Stay curious, go through a discovery process, because those paths are going to be wonderful, and you're going to get, to a plateau where you'll see more than what you had originally envisioned. And that has truly been part of my life experience, part of my career. And I do continue to climb and reach those landings and kind of look at what else is next there. So I'm excited about that. So I would say stay curious and have a group of people that you can be accountable and stay accountable with. And the one thing is write it down, because if you don't write it down, it's just all in your head and it's all talk.
I lied. One more question.
Okay.
Would the young lady growing up in Eagle Pass be amazed to meet you today?
Gosh. I hope so. I would think so, because again, it's all about being relatable. And I would tell that young girl, you have a bright future, just stay smiling and put your best foot forward. And if someone isn't nice to you, just walk around them, is what I would tell her.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise, Barry. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you all for watching and participating in civil society. And as always, thank you to Kate Tolliver, our managing producer, for her support. You can read more about Diana Maldonado and the Hispanic Chamber and the issues we just discussed, and view previous and future episodes of Civil Society at nonprofitaustin.org/civil-society. I wish you all a happy holiday season. And again, Thank you, Diane.